හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Friday, the 9th of February 2024. Connectivity. Land connectivity with India will position Sri Lanka as a logistics hub in the Indian Ocean, says President Ranil Wickremesinghe addressing the Indian Ocean Conference, but warns of dangers for smaller nations caught between major powers. Energy supplies. India's Petronet to supply over 800 tons of LNG to Sri Lanka on a daily basis. Talks underway on the construction of a floating storage regasification unit. Fuel security and preparedness. Sri Lanka taking measures for the establishment of a $200 million fuel buffer stock to safeguard against potential economic shocks.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
This is AdaDerana First at 9 with Ndivari Amuata and Mahesh Jani. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. You're joining us once again on your prime time English news service on AdaDerana 24. Good evening, Mahesh.
Good evening, Indivari. A lot of stories to discuss, but there's some kind of good news from the sporting sector, which is basically some good news because of Pathum Nisanka.
24 years after Sri Lanka had a score of 189 in ODI cricket.
By Sanat Jayasuriya, the great cricketing legend. And then I remember that particular match because in 2000 watching that, and you know, that was supposed to be one of the biggest thrillers. It took some time for that record to be broken.
Certainly, and Pathum Nisanka breaks Gale's and Sehwag's record of a double ton in ODI century, but that story is coming up later on in the bulletin on our sports segment. Before that, we have your headline-making story. While highlighting the importance of integrating in the Indian Ocean in light of India's and Indonesia's growth, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says discussions are underway with the Indian government on land connectivity, making the island nation a regional logistics hub, which will enable South India to have access to Sri Lankan ports in Colombo and Trincomalee.
He made these comments while delivering the keynote address in the 7th edition of the Indian Ocean Conference, which was held in Perth in Australia. Taking the tension in the Red Sea into account as the Houthi rebels wreak havoc on naval vessels, President Wickremesinghe said Sri Lanka, as the chair of the Indian Ocean Rim Association, offers to recommence discussions on the freedom of navigation in the Indian Ocean.
The 7th edition of the Indian Ocean Conference under the theme Towards a Stable and Sustainable Indian Ocean commenced at Perth in Australia today. The conference is organised by the India Foundation in association with the Ministry of External Affairs of India, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies Singapore and the Perth US Asia Centre. President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who left for Australia yesterday to attend the conference on the invitation from the India Foundation and the Government of Australia, delivered the keynote address at the event today.
We have seen an increased militarization of the Indian Ocean, which is redefining power balances and alliances. Therefore, balancing between the great power rivalry is becoming an increasingly more complex task. The Ukrainian war and the consequent Western sanctions on Russia has resulted in the resource-rich economy finding new markets in China and the Western Indian Ocean. China itself has played an active role in healing the rift between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran, its allies, have become important players in West Asia. The ill-advised judgment of the US in supporting the Gaza war will diminish its influence in the region. The hostility of the countries forming the Islamic Arch in the Indian Ocean will prevent any close rapprochement with USA for some time. The Russian, Chinese and Iranian strategies are successfully biting at the US hegemony, thereby further weakening the US. The Indian Ocean stability therefore requires an early end to the Gaza war. The recent attacks on commercial vessels by Yemen-based Houthi rebels is a challenge to the freedom of navigation. We have to ensure access and mobility in Suez Canal, the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb and the Gulf of Aden. We need to refocus on the freedom of navigation in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka offers to recommence the discussions on the freedom of navigation in this ocean. According to estimates, there will be an 8-fold increase in the GDP of India and Indonesia by 2050. Similar increases are expected in some of the other countries in South and West Asia. This requires additional port capacities and new transport routes. The Suez Canal may not be sufficient. In this regard, India's 2 new connectivity initiatives are welcome. Firstly, the India-Mumbai, Iran-Russia corridor, and secondly, the India, that's Mumbai, Middle East, European corridor. Work has already commenced on the Chao-Kunming corridor, giving access to Western China. Thailand is planning the Kra land bridge connecting the Gulf of Siam with the Bay of Bengal. India and Sri Lanka are commencing feasibility studies on land connectivity between the 2 countries, making Sri Lanka a regional logistic hub with Colombo and Trincomalee ports available to South India. Sustainable exploitation of our ocean resource is critical for our survival, as the ocean provides for our future. A code of conduct on freedom of navigation and overflight and unimpeded commerce and similar guiding principles on dealing with the climate crisis and the sustainable use of the Indian Ocean are necessary. Only the leaders of the Indian Ocean countries can ensure that these measures are translated to the creation of an overarching regional architecture for the Indian Ocean region. Therefore, the responsibility lies with us.
On the sidelines of the 7th Indian Ocean Conference, President Ranil Wickremesinghe highlighted the involvement of Australian firms in Sri Lanka's renewable energy and went on to affirm the island's commitment towards bolstering further bilateral relations. He shared those thoughts during a meeting with the Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong. In the meantime, during a meeting with the Sri Lankan diaspora in Perth, Sri Lanka's Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri revealed initiatives to facilitate programs in Sri Lanka backed by Sri Lankan expatriates. Also during the sidelines of the Indian Ocean Conference, Premier of Western Australia Roger Cook expressed his state's interest in renewable energy sector in the country. During the meeting between the Sri Lankan President and the Western Australian Premier, plans were also shared on the possibility of establishing direct aviation connections between Sri Lanka and Perth.
On the sidelines of the 7th edition of the Indian Ocean Conference, which commenced in Perth, Australia today, President Ranil Wickremesinghe met with the Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong. The Australian official underscored her government's renewed dedication to the Indian Ocean region and fostering closer ties with pertinent nations. The President's office reported that President Ranil Wickremesinghe shared his insights on the Indian Ocean's evolving dynamics, particularly emphasizing the importance of the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and went on to highlight the involvement of Australian firms in the renewable energy sector. Both leaders affirmed their commitment to bolstering bilateral ties further. In the meantime, President Wickremesinghe held a meeting with Sri Lanka's diaspora community in Perth, Australia this morning. The President provided an update on Sri Lanka's journey towards recovery and also discussed strategies aimed at modernizing the economy. Further, President's Chief of Staff Sagala Ratnayaka highlighted plans to establish the Office of Overseas Sri Lankans, which is expected to provide an avenue for the diaspora to engage constructively with the government. In addition, Sri Lanka's Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri highlighted initiatives aimed at facilitating programs in Sri Lanka backed by Sri Lankan expatriates. In other highlights of the President's official visit to Australia, President Ranil Wickremesinghe met with the Premier of Western Australia, Roger Hugh Cook. During discussions, the Premier conveyed his state's keen interest in renewable energy and agriculture development, along with establishing direct aviation connections between Sri Lanka and Perth. Further, President Wickremesinghe outlined Sri Lanka's modernisation program in agriculture and extended an invitation to the Western Australian Premier to promote investment in the sector. President Ranil Wickremesinghe also extended an invitation to the Premier to visit Sri Lanka and explore investment opportunities in the country.
Minister of Mass Media, Transport and Highways, Dr. Bandula Gunawardena, says it is impossible to renegotiate and change the terms and conditions of the agreement which Sri Lanka has inked with the International Monetary Fund. Addressing the House during the parliamentary debate following the President's policy statement delivered on Wednesday, the Mass Media Minister said that the government is legally bound to settle its total debt by 2050. Meanwhile, parliamentarian of the National People's Power, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, says that her party is ready to cooperate with any government which will act against corruption.
පාර්ලිමේන්තුව පසුගිය අවුරුදු දෙක තුළ ඉතාම බැරෑරුම්ම ආර්ථික මූල්‍යමය ඒම වාගේම ව්‍යවස්ථාමය අර්බුදයන් හරහා ගමන් කරා. ඒ සඳහා ජනාධිපතිතුමාට ලබා දෙන ලද සහයෝගයට අපි යලිත් ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂයේ මේ අවස්ථාවේදී යලිත් ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා.
ජාත්‍යන්තර මූල්‍ය අරමුදලත් එක්ක ඇති කරන් තියෙන ගිවිසුම සමහර අය හිතනවා අපි ඇවිල්ලා කතා කරලා වෙනස් කරන්න පුළුවන්. ආණ්ඩුවක් අත්සන් කරලා තියෙන ගිවිසුමක් එවැනි කතා කරලා වෙනස් කරන්න පුළුවන්ද? 2050 වෙනකන් මේ ණය ටික ගෙවන්න අපි නීතියෙන් බැඳිලා ඉන්නවා.
89 රෙන්න හැම ආණ්ඩුවකම තමුන්නාන්සේ ඇමතිවරයෙක්. ඉතින් මේ ණය වැඩි වෙන එකට තමුන්නාන්සෙත් වක් කියන්න ඕන.
අපි ඔක්කොම වක් කියන්න ඕනේ.
ඔහුගේ කතාව තුළ ඔහු ඇඟෙව්වා මේ විශේෂයෙන්ම ජනතා විමුක්ති පෙරමුණ ඔහුත් එක්ක ඉතාමත්ම කිට්ටුවෙන් වැඩ කරා කියලා දූෂණ විරෝධී කටයුතු වලට ඒකේ දේශපාලන අරමුණත් අපිට හොඳට තේරෙනවා. ඒක අපි බබ්බු නෙවෙයිනේ. ඔව් ඕනෑම ආණ්ඩුවක් දූෂණයට එරෙහිව ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙනවා නම් අපි ඔවුන් සමග සහයෝගයෙන් වැඩ කරන්න සූදානම්. ඒ පදනමේ ඉඳගෙන තමයි 2015 වුණත් මැදිහත් වීමක් සම සාකච්ඡාවක් ආරම්භ කරේ ඒ බලාපොරොත්තුවේ. නමුත් දින 52ක් යන්නේ ඉස්සෙල්ලා ලංකාවේ සිද්ධ වෙච්ච විශාලම දූෂණයක් ඔහුගේ නායකත්වයේ යටතේ සිද්ධ වුණා. එවැනි ආණ්ඩුවක් සමග තවදුරටත් දූෂණයට එරෙහිව ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න බැහැ කියන එක ඉතාමත්ම පැහැදිලි වුණ නිසා තමයි ඒ ක්‍රියාවලියෙන් අයින් වුණේ. සහ මේ නායක අනුර කුමාර දිසානායක මන්ත්‍රීතුමත් අපේ කණ්ඩායමක් මේ වෙලාවේ ඉන්දියාවේ සංචාරය කිරීම පිළිබඳ සමාජයේ විශාල කතාබහක් යනවා. අපි කියන්න ඕනේ ජාතික ජනබලවේගය කියන්නේ වෙනස් වන ලෝක තත්ත්වයන් එක්ක අවශ්‍ය තැන්වලදී තියෙන තත්ත්වයන් අනුව වෙනස් වෙන්නත් අපි කිසිසේත්ම බය නැහැ.
අපි වෙනස් වෙන්න ඕන නම් අපි වෙනස් වෙන්න ඕන. ඔබතුමියත් කිව්වා අපි අවුරුදු 25කට 30කට ඉස්සෙල්ලා වෙනස් වෙන්න තිබ්බ තීන්දුව වලින් අද වෙනස් වෙයි. ඉතාමත් හොඳයි.
රාජාසන කතා තියලා පම්පෝරි ගැහුවට එක වේල කාලා ජීවත් වෙන අති බහුතරයක් ජනතාව මේ රටේ ඉන්නවා. තෙල් මිල දරා ගන්න බෑ මට විනාඩියක් දෙන්න. විදුලි බිල දරා ගන්න බෑ. බඩු මිල දරා ගන්න බෑ. ඡන්ද මගඩි විදියට තව මාස 5ක් 6ක් යද්දි නම් අඩු කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. ඒක බොරුවක්.
පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ කතා කරන සමහර ආණ්ඩුවේ മന്ത്രിවරු ටිකින් ටික හොරෙන් හිමින් ජනාධිපතිතුමා විවේචනය කරන්න පටන් අරන් තිබෙනවා. අද අපේ මහාචාර්යතුමා කිව්වා ජනාධිපතිතුමා කතාව ගැන කියලා මේ අපි සත්‍ය අසත්‍ය වෙන් කරගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්න ඕනේ කියලා කොටිම කියනවා කිව්වා අසත්‍ය කතා මෙතන කියනවා.
ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයා විනාශ කරේ ඔය යක්කු. වෙන කවුරුවත් නෙමෙයි. ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයාට මේ ආර්ථික ප්‍රතිපත්ති ක්‍රියාත්මක කරමු කියා ලණු දුන්නේ කවුරුවත් නෙමෙයි නාලක කොට හේවලා. ඒ මහත්තුරුම තමයි එහා පැත්ත එකපාරටම ගිහිල්ලා සමගි ජනබලයේ ආසන සංවිධායකම් ගත්තා. අද මේ ආර්ථික ඔස්තාරලා ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයා හරි මාර්ගේ අරන් ගියා නම් අද මෙහෙම කතා කරන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ අපිට.
Members have been appointed to several parliamentary select committees as the parliament reconvened subsequent to its prorogation. Dr. Harsha De Silva was appointed as the new chairman of the Committee of Public Finance following a unanimous decision made by all parties linked to the opposition.
SJB MP Dr. Harsha De Silva has been reappointed as the new chairperson of the Committee of Public Finances. The Select Committee of Parliament appointed members to the Finance Committee of the Government for the new term.
විපක්ෂයේ සියලු පක්ෂවල ඒකමතික තීරණයට අනුව මගේ නම යෝජනා වෙලා තිබුණා සභාපති හැටියට. එය රාජ්‍යත් පිළිඅරගෙන තිබුණා ගිය පාර වගේ කලබල කරන්නේ නැතුව අපිට ආරංචි වෙලා තියෙනවා විදේශීය ණය හිමියෝ ISP හෝල්ඩර්ස්ලා සෑහෙන තද ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එකක් දීලා තියෙනවා තුන්වෙනි IMF වාරිකය ලබා ගන්න දෙන්නේ නැහැ ඔවුන් සමග ණය ප්‍රතිවහල් කිරීමේ වැඩපිළිවෙලකට රාජ්‍යයට එන්න බැරි වුණොත් කියලා. අපි වහාම මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශයට මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් දැනුවත් කරන්න කියලා අද නියෝග කරා. නොයෙකුත් ඉරවෙලා තියෙන කටයුතු ඉස්සරහට අපි අරගෙන යන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
In the meantime, the opposition has decided not to nominate Member of Parliament Partili Champika Ranawaka, who represented the government's Finance Committee on behalf of the opposition until the completion of the 5th session of the 9th Parliament. As per the announcement of the Parliament Speaker, Dr. Nalaka Godeheva has been nominated to represent the Finance Committee on behalf of the opposition.
මුදල් කාර්ක සභාවේ මම කල්නුත් හිටියා මේ පාරත් විපක්ෂ විසින් මාව යෝජනා කරලා ඇති කවුරු කෙනෙක්ව විශේෂයෙන්ම අයින් කරන්න අවශ්‍ය නම් මිස වෙනසක් වෙයි කියලා මම හිතන්නේ නැහැ.
Well, Sri Lanka police added another 349 names of wanted drug traffickers to the list of wanted suspects, updating the list, which currently contains names of over 42,000 wanted drug traffickers.
Well, the list was previously shared among all police stations across the island as part of the Yukthir special operation, which was launched to curb island-wide distribution of narcotic substances.
Now, the police confirmed that 705 suspects have been arrested within the 24-hour cycle ending at 12 a.m. today, and added that the special operation, which was launched on the 17th of December last year, will progress undeterred across Sri Lanka.
With that, here's a look at other local stories making news in brief.
A van which was transporting a group of Russian nationals from Ahungalla to Alla collided with a lorry earlier this morning. The accident occurred at the Suryavavi interchange of the Southern Expressway. 4 tourists, the driver of the van, the driver of the lorry, his wife and his 3 children were rushed to the Hambantota General Hospital for treatment. In Gonapala, meanwhile, a 25-year-old along with an illegally assembled luxury vehicle bearing a fraudulent license plate was taken into the custody of the Moragahena police. The vehicle was identified after suspicions were raised about a vehicle matching its description in the area. Investigations revealed that the license plate of the vehicle belonged to a vehicle owned by an individual in Bangadeniya, Chilo. In the meantime, a group of 66 Sri Lankan nationals who were employed at 2 apparel factories in Jordan returned to the island after the 2 factories shut down abruptly. It was revealed that the 2 apparel factories in Jordan had closed the facilities with no prior notice given to the employees. Subsequently, a group of Sri Lankans who were employed at the 2 apparel factories in question were brought back to the island, and they arrived at the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katunayake early this morning after receiving their salary dues and other entitlements. In the meantime, the Sri Lankan embassy in Jordan stated that another group of Sri Lankans who were employed at the 2 factories are expected to be repatriated to Sri Lanka within the next 2 days.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's take you to the latest headlines on business. Sri Lanka has earned $3 million in revenue through the revived bunkering system for vessels. Now, State Minister of Power and Energy, D.V. Chanaka, said that the sale of 5,200 metric tons of fuel generated revenue of $3 million.
And D.V. Chanaka went on to say that the government is taking proactive measures to ensure energy security with the establishment of a $200 million buffer stock to safeguard against potential economic shocks to Sri Lanka. The State Minister told reporters today that this is a significant step forward in the stabilization of the country's energy finances. According to D.V. Chanaka, Sri Lanka is currently holding the largest oil reserves in the recent history, making an improvement in fuel security and preparedness.
2024 අපි මේ අවුරුද්දේ අවුරුදු දෙකකට පස්සේ බංකරින් ව්‍යාපාරය අපි නැවතත් ආරම්භ කරා විශේෂයෙන්ම කංජතෙල් නීතිගත සංස්ථාව මගින් අපි පළවෙනියටම අපේ ෆර්නස් ඔයිල් මෙට්‍රික් ටන් 5200ක් අපි නැව්වලට අලෙවි කරලා ඩොලර් මිලියන 3ක් හොයාගන්න අපිට මේ මාසේ හැකි වුණා. ඒ වගේම ඉදිරියේදී ඩීසලුත් අපි බංකරින් සඳහා ඒ වගේම නැව්වලට අවශ්‍ය ලබා දෙන්න අපි ඉතාමත් කෙටි කාලයක් තුල ආරම්භ කරනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම අපි ගිය අවුරුද්ද තුල අපි වැඩියෙන්ම අවධානය යොමු කරේ විදුලි නිෂ්පාදනය සඳහා තමයි. අපේ එන සම්පූර්ණ HFO ෆර්නස් ඔයිල් නැප්ත යන මේ සියල්ලම ලබා දුන්නේ විදුලි නිෂ්පාදනය සඳහා පමණයි. හැබැයි මේ අවුරුද්දේ අපි මෙට්‍රික් ටන් 10000ක් සෑම මාසයකම අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම වෙන් කළා තියෙනවා නැව් සඳහා විකුණා ගැනීම සඳහා. ඒ තුලින් කංජතෙල් නීතිගත සංස්ථාවට ඍජුවම ඩොලර් ආදායමක් ලබා ගන්න හැකියාව ලැබෙයි කියලා අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා.
Chief Executive Officer of India's top gas importer Petronet, Akshay Kumar Singh, revealed that his company will be supplying around 850 tons of liquefied natural gas to Sri Lanka on a daily basis.
Now, speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the India Energy Week in Goa, the Petronet CEO said that they are looking at supplying of around 350,000 tons of LNG to the island nation. Speaking further, Akshay Kumar Singh said that they have not finalized the investment plan for a floating storage regasification unit and added that they will prepare a detailed feasibility report once the Sri Lankan government gives formal approval to the project.
On the 1st of February, Power and Energy Minister Kanchana Wijesekara revealed that India's top gas importer Petronet LNG has proposed to supply liquefied natural gas to Sri Lanka to help the island nation's power generation from its Yugadanavi and Sobadanavi power plants. Speaking to Reuters yesterday, Wijesekara stated that Sri Lankan officials and officials of India's state-run Petronet LNG are currently working out the mechanics of shipping LNG. While highlighting that its negotiations are progressing positively, the minister said there will be some positive outcomes within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Meanwhile, speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the India Energy Week in Goa, Chief Executive Officer of India's Petronet Akshay Kumar Singh told reporters that his company will supply around 850 tons a day of LNG or superchilled gas to Sri Lanka for 5 years, during which it plans to build and commission a floating storage regasification unit, which is essentially a regasification unit housed on a vessel. On an annual basis, Petronet LNG is looking to supply around 350,000 tons of LNG to the island nation. Singh said the requirement is almost 50 containers per day, and 50 tankers that are capable of carrying 70 metric tons need to be transported per day to Sri Lanka. He added that the average frequency of supply will be once every 2 days, using ships that can accommodate 100 such tankers. According to media reports, the planned floating storage regasification unit, which has been under discussion for years, is finally like to see the light of day sometime in 2028. The Petronet CEO said they have not finalized the investment plan and added that they will prepare a detailed feasibility report once the Sri Lankan government gives formal approval to the project.
Taking you to the secondary market, the Colombo Bourse ended higher for an 8th straight session today, aided by gains in consumer staples and industrial stocks. The all-share price index settled up 0.19% at 10,567.33, while the S&P SL20 ended higher 0.39% at 3,026.77. For the week, the index has risen 1.3%, seeing its best week in more than 2 months. Cargill's PLC, John Keel's Holdings were the top gainers on the all-share price index, gaining 4.31% and 0.915% respectively. Trading volume on the all-share price index fell to 22.1 million shares from 33.1 million in the previous session. The equity market's turnover fell to 792.4 million from 1.11 billion rupees in the last session. Capital goods sector was the top contributor to turnover, while the banking sector contributed the second highest during the session. Foreign investors were net sellers, offloading stocks worth 154.8 million rupees, while domestic investors were net buyers, purchasing shares worth 683.1 million. And the Sri Lankan rupee depreciated against the US dollar today to end trading at 313.6 rupees. Here's a look at how the rupee fared against other major currencies during the day.
Well, the latest on the international markets. Now, global shares stood their ground today after Wall Street scaled new heights, with looming U.S. inflation data set to help investors update their bets on interest rate cuts and steer the dollar's direction. Meanwhile, the yen fell to a 2-month low today as adjustments to interest rates forecasts prompted Japanese shares to reach 34-year highs.
The MSCI All-Country Stock Index was up 2.5% for the year. The mood in stocks was buoyed by Wall Street, where the S&P 500 index rose about 5,000 points for the first time ever yesterday, capping a 21% surge since October. In Europe, the stocks index of 600 companies was flat. S&P stock index futures were slightly weaker ahead of Wall Street's open, with US inflation revisions later on closely watched for any sign that market assumptions that price pressure is in retreat needs recalibration. Meanwhile, Japanese shares hit 34-year highs today, while adjustments to interest rate expectations sent the yen to a 2-month low. In China, mainland markets were closed and Hong Kong traded thinly and shut early, with the Hang Seng down 0.8% amid nerves authorities may not deliver on promises for support. Japan's Nikkei, which has been receiving a gush of foreign inflows as investors flee China, rose 0.3%, aided by a retreating yen that traded at its weakest in more than 2 months at 149.43 per dollar. Nissan shares collapsed almost 12% for their largest fall in decades after the automaker cut its outlook on slumping China sales.
Well, oil prices were on track for an over 5% gain week on week today amidst persistent tension in the Middle East after Israel rejected a ceasefire offer from Hamas. Brent crude futures slipped to 0.25% on the day to $81 and 43 cents barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell by 0.12% to $76 and 13 cents a barrel. Israeli forces continued deadly airstrikes on Gaza today after the bombing of Gaza's southern border city of Rafah yesterday helped send oil prices up around 3% in the previous session. Now, Brent futures prices firmed to about $81 a barrel after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected a proposal to end the war in the Palestinian enclave on Wednesday. Now, Russia is exporting more crude in February than it planned under the OPEC Plus deal following a combination of drone attacks and technical outages at its refineries. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Department on yesterday sanctioned another 3 entities based in the UAE and 1 tanker registered by Liberia for violating a cap placed on the price of Russian oil by a coalition of Western nations. Well, that's all we have for tonight on First at 9. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Mahesh Johnny.
And I'm Indivari Amuatta. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.